So you can go ahead and turn to Numbers 13, and we'll get there in a minute. But recently, I encountered a situation. And let's just say this situation was less than desirable. It wasn't something I wanted to experience, I got some news I didn't want to hear. I'm not going to give any specifics, but I'm just going to say that it was something that it would have spent a lot of people into a tailspin. And I didn't go into a tailspin, and I didn't get stressed out, but I still began to react. You'll catch me in a minute. I began to react logically. I began to think through scenarios. I began to do a little research. But the more thinking I did, and the more research I did, the more the way I was reacting to the situation didn't quite sit well with me. And then it was like, out of the blue, it just hit me. You know what? You've gotten news like this before. It's not that you haven't seen something like this before. You just need to have faith. But, what kind of hit me was, how you say, you come across situations and you say you're going to do something when you say, well, may as well. What are you saying? Well, you know how we do. We may as well. What we're really saying is, I'm out of choices anyway. So I may as well try this. What I had to lose, I may as well. But I was thinking about it because I was thinking, I just really need to believe God for the same favor that I've experienced before. But still, I remember my kind of thought was like, well, I may as well. Y'all know what I'm talking about. See, when we say that, it's usually the only remaining option. So, why not? This is the thing. We can't approach situations in our lives, when we get bad reports, when we experience things that we don't want to experience, when we have those destiny decisions that Pastor was talking about a few weeks ago. We can't face those types of decisions with may as well kind of attitude. We've got to be on the offensive. We got to be proactive. We don't want to just let stuff happen and then get to the last option and be like, may as well. See, what we do, we have to make sure that what we need to do, we have to make sure that faith is our first option, not the last resort. See, in sports, when you talk about your first option, in basketball, it's that guy you want to have the ball when time is running out and you're down by 2, right? In football, it's the person on the team that you can get the ball to that's going to get you some more yards. That's your first option, right? But when we hear the phrase last resort, you think of desperation. You think of, again, you've tried everything else. This is your last option. This is your last resort. And unfortunately, we as believers often approach situations that we encounter with faith as our last resort, not our first option. Because see, it's easier to do what I did. You begin to react. You begin to think and think some more to the point that you overthink, right? And then you start making plans, and you get into, especially us ladies, we kind of get into fix-it mode, right? But we have to develop a habit of faith. We have to develop a habit where we don't react, but we respond every time. This is the key. Every time in faith. See, you may remember that definition of habit from when Pastor did that series a few months back. That is an acquired behavior pattern regularly followed until it has become almost involuntary. response in faith needs to be so regular. What I say? Every time. It needs to be so regular that what? It becomes involuntary. It is our automatic response to each and every situation that we encounter, good or bad, desirable, undesirable, but that when we are face to face with something and we have to make a decision, that we respond in faith first. See, we have to take a step back. A lot of times what happens is we encounter this situation and we get this bad news and then we start to react. And, again, we start thinking and we start thinking and we start thinking and we start over. You know how it just starts turning. And then next thing you know, you started doing stuff you didn't have any business doing. But we got to stop and take a minute and say, you know what? God, I have been here before. If you hadn't been there before, I've seen somebody who's been here before, but it doesn't even matter if I have because I know who you are. I understand what you're capable of. And so I need to stop right here and take a minute. I understand that you are able to move on my behalf in this situation. We need to have a response of faith first. Develop a habit where we respond in faith first. So in Numbers 13, many of you have heard this story. This is where Moses sent the spies to the land of Canaan for 40 days, and he wanted them to do some reconnaissance work. He wanted to know all about the people in verses 18 through 20, whether they were strong or weak, few or many, how the city was set up and what the land was like, whether it was the land was rich or poor. And he even encouraged the spies to bring something back, bring back some fruit from the land. So verse 23 tells us that they cut down a cluster of grapes that was so big, 2 people had to carry it on a pole. Okay? So they were out there doing their assignment and doing what they were sent to do. But let's look at Numbers 13 and verse 26. It says, now they, the spies, departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Then they told him and said, when we went to the land where you sent us, it truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. They not only had grapes, they had pomegranates, they had figs, all kinds of stuff. Verse 28, nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. So they gave the good news and the bad news, right? But then in verse 30, then Caleb quieted the people before Moses. Shush, 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 shush. Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak, come from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. The children of Israel just got a bad report. Now they had a choice to make. How were they going to react? What were they going to do? Now, of course, if you read the story, you know what happened. But we're going to just walk through this for the sake of, Okay. So they had a bad report. Here they were at the border of the land that God had promised. And truly it was plentiful. The spies saw the milk and the honey. They saw those big grapes. I mean, they heard that report and they saw it, but the bad overshadowed the good. Right? See, sometimes you need a filter on what you let in. Sometimes you need a little bit of a filter to what you allow to sink and stay and what you let keep passing on. Oh, come on. So what What we find out, though, and as many of you already know, in chapter 14, verse 1, this is what they did. So all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us select a leader and return to Egypt. So they just reacted. They got the bad report, and here they go. They're sitting here thinking. Now, I'm sitting here thinking, now, they sitting here and told me about all these giants, and they said that land is going to devour us. Now, mind you, the spies have already added to the story, right? They just gave the report. Now, they've added to the story. This land devours its inhabitants. How do they know? They've added to the story and made it look even worse than it is, and just negated the ability of God to fulfill his promise. See, you've got to remember, this happened not long after they left Egypt. It was probably barely a year. So already they had forgotten the heavy price they paid for all that stuff they had in Egypt. They were slaves. They were not free. But yet, in their minds, this was their plan. This was their reaction. This is what they thought was going to work out better for them. As opposed to having faith that God was going to fulfill his promise. He'd already told them what he was going to do. Right? Well, we know that those of you who've been studying scripture a while, you know Hebrews 11:1. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Well, what we have to keep in mind here is that key phrase, the evidence of things not seen. See, your eyes can deceive you. So there are many times, and in most times, you need to keep your eyes off of your situation. Because think about the children of Israel now. Here they are, not several months removed from Egypt, and here they are, sitting here, they've been through the Red Sea. They walked through on dry ground. They had the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. They've seen manna come from the sky and water come from a rock, and here they are, and unable to act in faith that God can take them into the land. Even after all they've seen. So there's a reason that Paul said we walk by faith and not by sight. With that word walk literally means to live, to conduct oneself by faith. It is something that we have to do day to day, decision by decision, circumstance by circumstance. It's not something that we just do. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to respond in faith than others. You understand what I'm saying? Sometimes it just comes naturally. Like I've taught you all about before, with my kids, it didn't even cross my mind but my kids were going to be okay. When I was in the hospital, the situation may have looked grim, but it didn't cross my mind. It's all going to be all right. But there are other situations that it's not so easy. And so we have to understand that, because even the children of Israel, they had seen great things, but they still had a hard time believing. And the truth be told, you've seen great things, but there are times you have a hard time believing. See, we say we believe God, but we really don't. Right? We don't really believe him because we don't really trust him. So then the question begs to be asked, why not? Because if you truly trust in God, see, trust is reliance on the integrity, strength, ability, surety, etc. of a person or thing. So when we trust God, we trust his integrity, we trust his strength, we trust his ability, we trust his surety or his certainty. And so when we trust in his certainty, then why can't we believe? Because when we trust our eyes, we rely on the evidence that's before us. We rely on what we see and thus fail to believe. See, the problem is this. Yeah, when we react, sometimes things may happen and they may not go the way we really want. We've all done that, right? Took matters into our own hands. Made some stuff happen. Y'all remember Abraham and Sarah took matters into their own hands. We got Ishmael, and it just really didn't work out the way they anticipated. But not only did it not work out the way they anticipated, it affected generations to this day. And see, what we have to understand is that not just our reactions at times, they don't just affect us. Other people pay for the decisions that we make in haste, for the reactions that we have and the responses that we enact when we don't act in faith. Our children pay, our children's pay. And we have to make sure that we understand, hey, I need to stop. I need to take a minute. It's not just about me. See, the children of Israel, 12 spies went, 10 came back, and 10 said, we can't do it. It's not good. We can't do it. It's a bad report. Well, what happened? Those 10 poisoned the mind and the outlook of the nation. The nation, as they took on that mindset, then received judgment. And see, this is the thing. The 10, they all fell dead. Doop, doop. I mean, can you just imagine all the spies standing up in front of the congregation? And 10 of them dropped to the floor, and Joshua and Caleb still standing there. And God has already said, look, let me read it to you. It goes on down in verse 19. Moses is making intercession as he always did. Bless his heart. Pardon the iniquity of this people, I pray, according to the greatness of your mercy, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt even until now. Verse 20, then the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word, but truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, because all these men, look, who have seen my glory and the signs which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have put me to the test now these 10 times and have not heeded my voice, they certainly shall not see the land of which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who rejected me see it. He said, look, y'all know how the story goes, many of you, that everyone over the age of 20, y'all are going to be in the wilderness for 40 years until all of you die out. All of you got to be gone. They reacted to the bad report. And it cost them. It cost the nation. See, we have to understand, again, it may not just be something that you experience. It may not be just a consequence that you experience, but if you do not respond in faith, it can affect someone else. It could cause someone else to sin. It caused them to rebel against God. Caused that whole nation to rebel against the God who delivered them, against the God they had seen perform miraculous things. And he said, look, these people, they've seen what I can do. See, and we've seen this. I mean, maybe it wasn't you, but you've seen people, desperate people, do desperate things. We have to develop a habit of responding in faith. It has to be our first option, not our last resort. It can't be the thing that we say, okay, well, I may as well. Nothing else worked. I messed all that up anyway, so I may as well. See, we have to take the position of Caleb. Like he said in verse 30, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. We have to have that attitude when we're facing circumstances and when we're faced with decisions and we don't know what's going on. But we say, you know what, no matter what it is, I'm well able to overcome it because I know the God that I serve and I trust in his integrity and his strength and his ability. And I know what he can do. And I understand that when I put my trust in him and I respond in faith, that it doesn't matter what it looks like, that when I step out here and do what I'm supposed to do, then I know he's got my back. We have to have that perspective. The Bible says that Caleb was of a different spirit. But see, this is what happens. Circumstances have a way of wearing us down. Trials and tribulations and things they have a way of just wearing us down. You know, we begin to expect things to happen a certain way, or we begin to we don't say it, but we kind of in our mind kind of expect the worst to happen, or, you know, we're expecting that, you know, God's really not going to come in the time that I need him to come. You know, we don't say these things, but we have this attitude and this mentality. And how do I know? Because our reactions are evidence that we don't believe God is going to do it for us when we need him to do it. But what happens, then we begin to take all of that and use it to rationalize our actions. Right? That thinking and thinking and thinking and overthinking and thinking and thinking and thinking and planning, and then, you know what I'm saying? But see, what we have to understand is that we have to look at these situations. And it was so fitting. I knew a little bit about the class this morning, but obviously I wasn't in there. And so, but I thought that was so powerful because, you know, many of you know the frequent parallel to the bondage of Egypt. And many of us are bondage to some things. You know, it could be an illness. You know, that the doctors have given you a bad report, and in your mind, there's no way around this. There's no way out of this. There's no way that you don't even think about God healing you. You know, when the pain hits, or when what that discomfort hits, and you just you've just been accustomed to going and taking that medication every day and doing what you have to do. So because you just want to get a little bit of relief, but you're not even thinking about the healing. You just think about the relief of the moment. It might be that you're a single woman and you're believing God for that man, but you've gotten accustomed to that. Well, that person's not going to ask me out, or that person's not going to call me back. You've just gotten in the attitude and the mentality that this is just the way it is, and this is the way it's going to be, and I had to accept that. Or it might be that you might make a six-figure salary, but you have to work 70, 80 hours a week to get it, and then you don't understand that this is the way it is. There's no way I can get another job and make the same money and work less hours. Oh, come on, somebody. Or it might be that you have that mentality, I'm going to just constantly get passed over for that promotion. They keep choosing the person with the more education. They keep choosing the person with more experience. They keep choosing the person. It's just the way it is. I'm going to be in this position until I retire. You might just have that mentality in your life that there is something keeping you bondage because you have refused to respond in faith. And you just say, you know what, this is just the way it is, and I have to accept it, and I have to take it. I'm here to tell you today that you do not. That you have to learn to develop a habit of faith and responding in faith to whatever situation you encounter. It doesn't have to be like that. But the circumstances have worn you down. And your mentality and your attitude reflect it because you react to adverse situations. Instead of stopping and taking them and say, you know what? This is not what God has for me. God did not intend for me to spend 2/3 of my life at work every week. God did not intend for me to spend my life in pain and in misery. God did not intend for me to walk around here depressed. God did not intend for me to be beneath. He said, you'll be above only and not beneath. God did not intend for me to live in this kind of situation or to live in poverty. He said you would be what? The lender and not the borrower. Come on, somebody. This is not what God intended. And when you get the revelation that it's not what God intended and that you have to stop reacting because what you're doing is set up the next generation to respond the same way, then you will say, oh God, I must respond in faith. I believe in you. I trust your character. I know you have the ability, and I'm going to respond in faith every single time. See, I believe ultimately Moses was a victim of this. You don't have to turn to Exodus 17, but in Exodus 17, shortly after they left Egypt, you all remember the incident with the water from the rock. They didn't have any water. And of course, they were talking about Moses like they always do, or always did. You know. Here we go. I'm going to see. You don't have to turn there, but look, Exodus 17, verse 2. Therefore, the people contended with Moses. Give us water that we may drink. And Moses said to them, why do you contend with me? Why do you tempt the Lord? But they were thirsty, right? So they complained against Moses in verse 3 of that chapter. And then they said again, why is it you brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children, our livestock with thirst? That was their favorite line. Why you bring us out of Egypt to kill us? It's too short-sighted. They didn't understand why God brought them out of Egypt. So at any rate, that's what happened. And then, you know, God told Moses, take that rod that you parted the Red Sea with, go hit that rock, and they're going to have some water. And of course, they had many trials and tribulations, and they got the sentencing of the 40 years. So everybody 20 years and over, you're going to die. You can't go in because I just can't work with you no more. And but turn to Numbers chapter 20. Numbers chapter 20. It's interesting because we find a similar situation. But let me tell you what's different. In Numbers chapter 20, we're at the beginning of the 40th year. So in Numbers chapter 20, in all likelihood, most of the old heads are dead. It's just a few of them left. You know, the ones that God's waiting to die off. But we have a similar situation in Numbers chapter 20. Look at verse 2. Now there was no water for the congregation. So they gathered together against Moses and Aaron. And the people contended with Moses and spoke, saying, if only we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. Why have you brought up the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness that we and our animals should die here? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there any water to drink. So Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the door of the tabernacle meeting, and they fell on their faces, which is where they were a whole lot of time with these people. But did that not sound exactly the same? But remember what I just said. This was the beginning of the 40th year. These would have been the children of those who had died out, that were complaining and that were contending against Moses. They were thirsty, but because, look, they were just kids. But they heard what their mama said. They heard what their daddy said in the tent when Moses wasn't around. They understood. They said, well, you know, daddy was always talking about why they bring us up out of Egypt into this wilderness. And so here go the children getting ready to make the same mistake that the parents made and cost them their lives because the parents did not have the faith to believe the God they had seen. Here they are making the same mistake. They wouldn't remember. Look, they didn't remember. Obviously, they said this isn't a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates. They weren't old enough to remember those big old grapes that they brought back. All they knew was the wilderness. But see, the parents weren't preaching them the promise. They weren't teaching them the faithfulness and the trustworthiness of God. What the parents were feeding into them was the lie of the enemy that we're going to always be in this wilderness. We'll never have what we had back in Egypt. They lived in the glory days, quote unquote, so to speak. Yes, slavery, you know, where they whip you several times. The glory days, they were talking about all back in Egypt. We had this. I bet you they in one time talk about how they killed folk and they just say, oh, but we went to Egypt. We had this and we had that and we had this. And see, you've gotten so accustomed to that bondage in Egypt that you have forgotten what you were supposed to be going after. You've gotten so accustomed to just being the second place. You've gotten so used to being passed over. You've gotten so accustomed to walking in pain and discomfort. You've gotten so accustomed to those things that you've forgotten the promise of God, and you will not with his promise if you don't respond in faith. If you react and constantly do what you want to do, it's not going to happen. And see, this is what was happening. The children were about to repeat the same error. But this time, it actually got Moses instead. But I'm going to tell you what happened. Because I'm not going to read it all, but God told Moses to speak to the rock. And there'll be water. And in verse 10, and Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels. Must we bring water out of this rock for you?" Then Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their animals drank. Now, a lot of times we hear this preached, or I have at least, that, it was Moses's temper. He responded angry because Moses had a little bit of temper. He killed that Egyptian. He saw him beating him. He took him out. But, that's not what God said. Look at verse 12. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not believe me, to hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them." What happened to Moses? He may have been angry. He called them rebels. But think about this thing now. This is the beginning of the 40th year. So for over 39 years, all he's been hearing is complaining. All he's been saying, he's been having to keep going to the tabernacle and fall on his face and say, "Lord, don't destroy him." And then they get mad at him again. And then, you know what I'm saying? For 40 years almost, this has been happening. And all he keeps seeing is these disobedient people. And then now those people, they're starting to die off. But now their children are coming back. And they want to fight with you and say, "Why you bring us out here?" And da-da-da-da. So he's been seeing the same thing. His mind has been conditioned to see and expect the same thing. Oh, come on. Somebody's going to catch this in a minute. His mind has been conditioned to see and expect the same thing and to react the same way. And so in his mind, this was the same. It was almost the same situation happening over and over again. And so here he goes, and God told him to speak to that rock. Why? Because this was truly a new generation. This was truly something new that God was getting ready to do. He wanted it to be different. He wanted it to look different. But all Moses could see was what was in the past. All he could see was what he'd been experiencing for the last 40 years, what he was used to, how he was used to them responding. And he was like, look, he said, "Moses, speak to that rock because I want to show them. They didn't see my power like that first generation. This is different, but I want to show them for myself. Speak to it." Now he honored it, but he got a hold of Moses and said, "Wait a minute. You didn't believe me." Why didn't he believe him? Circumstances wore him down. The wilderness actually wore him down as well. And if we can get that revelation before it's too late. I thank God for our bishop, my father-in-law, giving me that revelation this week in a, heart to heart. And I was like, well, this may not be for everybody, Lord. You might just be talking to me. You sure you want me to talk about this with everybody? But the reality is we can go years and years living the same way that God never intended because we constantly react. We never develop a habit of responding in faith, a habit that says, you know what, I'm going to trust God no matter what. I'm going to believe God no matter what the situation, no matter what the circumstance. That is going to be my first response. If we can get that before it's too late, because see what happened, I didn't read it, but what happened back in Numbers 14, after the spies dropped dead, and after they got the decree they were going to die, they were ready to go in then. They were like, let's get us an army together. Let's go take that land. I'm not going to die in the wilderness. Let's go. And they tried to say, look, don't go. God is not with you. Don't go. See, it was a little too late when they got that revelation. if we can get that revelation before it's too late. That there are some things that we have become captive to, some thought patterns, some expectations that we have become captive to. We expect to have to work that 70 or 80 hours a week, or we expect to have to pay that bill later, or we expect that we'll get passed over for that promotion. There are some thought processes that we become captive to. And if we can expose that, react in faith, and free ourselves from that captivity, we can experience something completely different. And that's what God wants for us. He didn't intend for us to live like that, y'all. We've got to learn to develop a habit of faith. Father God, we honor you, God. And Lord, I just pray that your word has reached and touched the places, God, that only your spirit knows need to be touched. And Lord, that you would show us, each and every one of us, the places and the things that we've allowed to just exist, that we've allowed to be the same. We don't have to live this way. We don't have to live in pain. We don't have to live in lack. We don't have to live constantly tired. Whatever it is, that's our thing. We don't have to live that way that you have not intended for us to live. But God, show us how in everything and in every circumstance we can respond in faith first. In Jesus' name, amen.